join me in welcoming Christine Forni.
Hello, I'm Christine Forni. I'm an artist from Chicago, and I'd like to start this off by giving a land acknowledgement to recognize that we are a native land. McHenry County College is located on the ancestral homeland of Peoria, Potawatomi, Miami, Sioux, Ho-Chunk, and Kickapoo people. I have the deepest respect for the indigenous intelligence and sciences. I believe through their knowledge, we can learn to live in harmony with the earth and one another and ourselves. So I also wanted to give thanks to Trevor Power. He's been excellent to work with, very helpful, a wonderful curator. My art practice, as you can see, investigates nature. I enjoy hiking and travel to many places across the United States and overseas. To the left is Lassen National Park, and to the right is the Cathedral Forest in, I believe it's western Pennsylvania. When I see the orange light sometimes that falls upon leaves rather than remembering the color of green, I kind of create my work in reflection of what my memories are. So when you go to the library here and you see the work in the exhibition, you'll see that some images through alternative photography processes have different colors and have more of an abstract look to them, like a monoprint or photography or a field of color. This is a residency that I had for 4 months. I traveled in Europe and went back to school at the age of 50. I decided that I wanted to create residencies that were aligned with my art practice. So I created a proposal and had a professor come with me as a translator because I could read French, but I could not actually speak it all that well. So I wanted to make sure everything was ready before I actually proposed to the museum to have the residency. As you can see, I was able to draw. There's many things that I didn't realize during these residencies that I have that actually align with my work now that I'm making. So whether this was 10 years ago, 5 years ago, these things come back and they come up within the work that I make. I realize that my process is kind of a little bit slower as far as having concepts and then getting them out. So these are display cases of the naturalist specimens that were collected at the Comparative Anatomy Gallery in the Natural History Museum of Science in Paris. And I really feel when you go to the library, you'll see a series called Relics. Through these hundreds of images that I took in the Museum of the Naturalist Specimen Collection, I came across this one image while preparing for my talk, and I thought, oh, there it is. It came up again. That was, I think, 2017 I had that residency. So when I was studying the naturalist collection of plant fossils and animal bones there, and again, I went through the same process through most of the residencies that I tried to get without a competition and create a residency on my own that aligns with my work. So I prepare how I will, hopefully, but you know, things always change when you are planning for residencies or giving a talk, and perhaps maybe the curator might get COVID. You just never really know what will happen. So while I was examining these relics of distant eras, I was struck by the realization that all life has souls intertwined together, carrying a memory of the past forward. All we have to do is look closely to see that. Right after the first residency that I had, I was also very interested, and you'll see in the work coming down the road in my presentation, that's before this had actually happened. I was always interested in plants and the ebb and flow that we have, from breathing and how much we rely on nature. So this was in the same year in Paris, again, back at school with very young people, working late hours. I ended up getting my second BFA at the Paris College of Art. There, at Echo de Bru, I collected the cuttings from the gardeners, and I took those back to the school and created porcelain botanical specimens. And I had access to the equipment, so I made 300 to 400 small specimens that eventually I carried those back to the United States. They were actually more important to me than my clothing. My clothing I actually shipped back in boxes, but all the specimen, I decided that this was really important. I didn't know what I was going to do with it just yet, but I knew that it aligned with my values and where I wanted to take my practice in the future. So this is a Wardian case. If you look at the gallery guide, there's a little note that I wrote on there, just small, to make it a little bit more interesting if somebody picked that up and was looking through the exhibition. So this is in my studio space. So after transferring all these small sculptures, I keep having to move them from place to place. I've utilized them in multiple installations. Some of them have been shown at artist-run spaces. Some of it has been shown at art centers in Chicago. And now a portion of that keeps evolving and is being shown here at McHenry County College. So I want to explain to you a little bit about my past. It's not necessarily a straight trajectory. I have a tendency to follow a meandering path with my practice. I came to art wanting to always be an artist, but studied graphic design and knew that I had to support myself. So what I'm going to do right now is show you the process of maybe a little bit what I can within the short period of time I have here, the evolution from starting with, I'm not going to show the design, but I will show the jewelry because the jewelry that I made was fine art. It just happened to be wearable art. So I wanted to also share that some of these, all the videos were actually directed by my husband, James Forni, who has his own studio, Octane Rich Media, and Octane Rich Films in Chicago. This was at Manna Contemporary, or at my studio in Chicago. My name is Christine Forni. I am a multidisciplinary artist using materials that add meaning to the work. I create juxtapositions of the natural and man-made in my sculptures, forming a flow of growth as I build each piece by hand. In this work, I use an opposition of mineral to industrial mediums, inspired by my observations of nature in urban environments. I was a metalsmith for many years, making wearable sculpture art. I made conceptual jewelry using sheets of metal and rough-cut gems. This pyrite-encrusted series of sculptures reflects on the body movement rather than considering the moving body. In the past, I was invited to have an exhibition in Barcelona. There, I had also taught at Escola La Joita and gave an artist talk about my cocoon-like jewelry. I was inspired by Gaudi's mosaics and his organic sculptural forms. In this sculpture, Torso, the minerals are formed similar to a mosaic. I create a piece resembling a skeletal form to attach a skin of pyrite crystals. This sculpture resembles a rib cage that has metamorphosed into a mineral fossil. A human anatomical reference, its transformed shape undulates between light and shadow, conveying at once strength intertwined with fragility. It was maybe a pivotal piece, I would have to say, for for my transition from jewelry into fine art, which happened probably about 15 years ago. This is also one of the later pieces that I had made, could have been around 2005, The Road to White Coral. This was actually a piece that was chosen by the university where I went to school. They had a 20-year anniversary at Iowa State University where it was a competition. 20 of the graduates from the design school were chosen in order to show their work, and it was really quite an honor at that time. It was New York's Museum of Art and Design chief curator who made the selection for the work to be chosen. This is kind of where I ended up leaning a little bit more into what I would say was fine art rather than making jewelry to sell, which I've always been more of a fine artist. And I think that's why in my previous career, when I was also a designer and I was an art director, that creative side, the conceptual side, not going for the obvious answers is what pushed me forward. This was, again, around 2003. I attended a gem show while looking for red coral strands. A dealer had told me that the strands were very rare, and he happened to have one that he was selling for a couple $100, and I thought, oh, they're so beautiful. But then he also said to me, most of the coral has been harvested for jewelry, and also drug up by the fishing boats or the fishing nets, and that anything that I would find was dyed at this point, not dyed in death, but dyed in color with unnatural pigments, and that his or natural red coral that was going extinct. And I thought to myself, I never want to own a piece of red coral. So that is how I came about making this series of jewelry. And then this came a little bit after that. There's like this ebb and flow between fine craft and fine art, where I started to take the techniques that I had known from metalsmithing, like mokume, where you solder or weld layers of metal on top of each other that are non-ferrous, say like copper, silver, or nickel. But if you have a lot of money, it could be gold in there, because that's also non-ferrous. Non-ferrous is something that doesn't contain iron and is not magnetic. I would solder those together, roll them out, hammer, roll them out again, solder them, cut them. I mean, it took forever to do this, and then you would hammer the backside, file the front. But the texture was very similar. I tried to do it in porcelain without knowing what the terminology was, but it's actually called narikomi, and so I aligned that with the concept of what I was working in at that point, which was making folk oral jewelry. I always drew, I always painted. It's something I've done since I've been a child. I just didn't necessarily share or exhibit that with anybody, but anybody who knew me knew that I did do that. So I had my first exhibition at the Ukrainian Institute of Modern Art with this piece. It was 23 karat gold drawing, because at that point I was a metalsmith, and occasionally when I was showing my work at SOFA in Chicago, I would have a little tiny bit of gold. Moving forward, that's all those leftovers and scraps that I had from jewelry was how I got my tack etch press that I now own, which I'm so grateful for. So I want to tell you a little bit of a story. This is a 23 karat gold point drawing. I didn't know if it would work. I figured out how it could work. And this was inspired by a dream I had of my immigrant maternal grandmother crossing the ocean on a boat from her native country of Ukraine. She came to me in many of my dreams as golden lights over water or illuminating trees, never in her body, but rather a calm glow of light in the night. This drawing was titled Moonrise, and it was in an exhibition at the Ukrainian Institute of Modern Art, Artists Respond to Genocide. This is another drawing I did that was sort of, you can kind of see the alignment that's happening. I never really planned to have the alignment. I just pulled out from what was inside of me in order to make the work that I make. So this I titled Emanate and Inspire. It's a graphic drawing, or a graphite drawing that I did on cradled wooden boards, depicting a symbiotic inhale and exhale, a relationship with plants and humans. This drawing I titled Sophia in the Garden. And then at the same time while I was doing these drawings, I also had to make a living. So I was selling my fine craft jewelry that I handmade myself. Sometimes I was lucky enough to get interns from RISD, Rhode Island School of Design. I seemed to get quite a few of those over the years, which was absolutely wonderful. This lower ring was the first ring that I made. It was more of a one-of-a-kind piece, but I built a full series of jewelry, which I'm not necessarily showing. It's more of like designed items. They were still beautiful, unique, different, handmade, but I'm showing you more of the fine art that aligns with the fine craft or the wearable art that I consider to be fine art jewelry. But this was a stepping stone, this ring that I made. And I had sold to 60 galleries and museums across the United States and overseas. In Canada, at the De Young Art Museum, at the Mad Museum, at the Milwaukee Art Museum, at the Smithsonian. And that's what kept me afloat for many years. But I think I started to build what was kind of like a sweatshop for myself. And I decided that that wasn't really what I intended to do. So I slowly pulled out of working with all the galleries and museums. It took like a 5-year process to do that without letting anybody down. So you can kind of see this winding and this wrapping that was happening from that ring. This was the first sculpture that I built. I don't think I told anyone this, but it was really a self-portrait. It is though if something is kind of dissipating or grounding itself. So it could be either or. The sculpture size is 36 by 32 by 140 inches. I can't even tell you how much wire is in there. At one point I had it calculated, but I don't have it in my notes. So it was a lot. I should have put the process picture in here because it's quite humorous. Within inside of the piece, again, you can see this looks like it could be coral, or maybe it could be jewelry, or it could be sort of like the heart or the life force in the center of the sculpture. It's sort of hidden in there. So this was my first large sculpture. I consider the small pieces sculptures too, even though they're wearable. I sold this last year and installed it in a private collection in Madison, Wisconsin. So I consider this to be my first like sculptural transition, and I never went back to making jewelry again. I sometimes think about it, but I'm more interested in not being so confined by the movement of the body. To the left, you'll see a painterly drawing that I did. This I exhibited at Zola Lieberman Gallery in Chicago during the pandemic. Again, this is a self-portrait. I was making kind of like black and white, not a lot of color except maybe the red that was signifying for the red coral in my work. And I took the same sculpture during the pandemic and I put it in the front corner of my studio and I bent it over just because it was sort of how I sort of felt, I guess, during those days. I believe you saw this sculpture in motion at the beginning of the presentation. This was a piece that I made for the Centro program. It's a competitive exhibition kind of class critique that takes place at the Hyde Park Art Center in Chicago. And I was so honored to be a part of that. I believe Trish Van Eck was the curator for that. I had made 2 sculptures and a painting in the back. And you can kind of see there is this ebb and flow between 3-dimensional forms, 2-dimensional forms, but everything's sort of a little bit more conceptually based on why the choices are that I make. So I started painting my sculptures and also drawing my sculptures. Sometimes I paint them after or draw them after, and they become sort of like the still life in my studio. So because I kind of go back and forth through different places and times as far as like my studio, I feel like there's this, I'm on water sometimes, it's not always level. I occasionally go back into the jewelry, but it isn't necessarily jewelry. These were pieces I made that might be components that are up in the pieces upstairs. These are more ephemeral pieces. The sizes are quite large. They're not to human body form. The one to the right is like 3 feet long by about 1.5 feet wide. And as this one you can kind of see is a little bit larger than that. This is titled Unknown Ancestors. So this was kind of like this very large, almost necklace yet sculpture that was as long as I could put my arms up. That was the distance that I made the center oval part. And these are all pieces that were from the artist residencies that I brought back in my suitcases home with me. So I have this as Unknown Burial. This was a piece that was strung on silk string, like I would have if I was making my jewelry. At that point, I also wanted to have something that was more nature-based. The measurement of this is 96 inches by about 60 inches by 3 inches. It's maybe a little bit taller than with me with my arms stretched up. So I don't think I went into it too much, but I did say that I went to school in Paris at 50. My husband and I went through some things in our life and had some changes we had to deal with our parents, taking care of them, passing, and things along those lines. We support ourselves. We're not independently wealthy. We needed to come back to work, and I actually missed Chicago. I decided to apply for a 2-year residency program at the Hyde Park Art Center. We were talking about maybe going someplace else, but because there were, I think, 3 artists that were awarded residencies, and I was one, I said we have to come back to Chicago. So this is like images from inside of my studio space. You'll see in the background there's this black image that's actually a photogram of the porcelain pieces. This is another piece that I had made, which to me has humor in it. It's titled Reading About Rhododendrons in a naturalist book that I collected. I collect a lot of etchings, a lot of naturalist books from the past. It's one of my hobbies that I had to stop doing because it gets a little too costly sometimes, but I do love them. And I love reading about how people would describe nature in the past in comparison to how they do now. So here I just wanted to show an example of the porcelain piece that was next to a photogram so that you can see the difference between that these weren't necessarily just plants. These were porcelain pieces that I had made from the plant cuttings that I brought back with me from Paris. And then at the Hyde Park art residency that I had, the artist residency I had, I took those into their darkroom because, again, I had a darkroom. I don't have a darkroom now, so I don't do photograms. But I realized it's okay. I don't have to have everything that I once had. I just have to keep making art, researching art, and moving forward, and not have regrets about, I don't have enough money because I can't do the work that I used to do when I was, back at school or at an artist residency. There's always something else that I can keep doing to move forward. So these were pieces that were also about memory. I started to add color and draw on the surface. I was trying to remember the color of the actual plant, possibly like what day that it was, what was it like, how much could I remember, how much was it maybe the enjoyment of seeing these transitions of color, like transitions of life, kind of gradually change. So I was fortunate enough to be invited to have an exhibition on the second floor gallery at the Hyde Park Arts Center called Fugitive Narratives, and this was curated by Mike Norris. This is more of an ephemeral piece that I made. It shows the pieces kind of with the same type of material that they both have. It's porcelain slip that has been unfired, and then it's the porcelain that has been fired. The way that it dries around the edges is something that a physicist, Adrian Busan, had come up with the term and the law, constructal law. So within that piece, it sort of shows, and I'll get I'll explain that just a little bit further down the road. This is actually the piece that I had made. Within the box to the left, you'll see there's the photogram again. Hidden beneath the trays are tons of porcelain pieces. I only showed those, nobody knew they were in there when we all did the artist talk. Now this was a piece that I had made for an artist-run space, and I really recommend that as a younger artist that you look into artist-run spaces versus then only going to the main galleries. It's very difficult to get into galleries, but there are a ton of artist-run spaces. This was in preparation for a gallery run by Mia Capitalupo. It's called Ignition Projects. And so I actually made it in my studio, but I had to test it before I put it into her gallery space, which was in a storefront window. So this is other details of the exhibition space on the second floor at the Hyde Park Art Center, showing some close-ups. And then this is in my studio space where these porcelain pieces still exist and they keep moving from studio to studio. I'm really grateful that I've finally placed them into this series called Relics. I'm going to continue and use all of the pieces except maybe one strand to put it into that series. So within this cabinet that I've been storing these porcelain pieces, I also wanted to show you some of the photograms a little bit more that I did. I titled these Seeing Plant Spirits. I call these drawings because it seems like I'm in collaboration with nature, I'm in collaboration with light, and then I choose to draw on the surface or how dark or how light the contrast becomes. I mean, I was quite amazed at like how beautiful these porcelain pieces actually looked on the photograms, because I wasn't sure if it would actually translate, because I've only seen photograms with glass or objects, but never porcelain pieces before. So I thought this might be interesting, and I was so excited when it actually worked. Again, I have flat files in my studio space, and I move the porcelain pieces to those flat files sometimes. You'll see the ones that are on wire there. Those were actually in the last piece at the Hyde Park Art Center for the Fugitive Narrative exhibition. So that was being filmed, I think, during the pandemic. Something happened to me during the pandemic where it was like all the black work that I had made, I no longer wanted to make black work anymore. I wanted to make work that had color, that had light. I felt like I had been trapped behind glass, behind windows. So I decided to start putting these colorful specimen pieces. Sometimes they're actually porcelain pieces. Sometimes they're paint skins that have fallen to my studio. I've used some of the material from my jewelry career, where I have mica, which I had used to place on the floor of the kiln, and then have the copper piece on top of that with vitreous glass enamel that was colored. And then I would heat up the kiln. I believe it's been a long time since I've done it, to 1500 degrees, leave it in there for a very short period of time. So in this piece, you can kind of see a little more close up. And I think that me and how I view things, because I, was a jewelry maker, I call it a fine craft artist, I was looking at things at a very kind of microscopic level a lot of the times. The details had to be perfect. You could never use any glue. Now I break all the rules I possibly can, but also respect them. So this was, the Hyde Park Art Center is a great place. They have these classes that are like critiques for working artists in the city, because we need community, and it's how sometimes I meet other artists. So during the pandemic, it was like right afterwards, the first class came about, and of course, I got COVID for the first time. So I wasn't able to go to the first class. They had to bring me in via Zoom after that. But this was really the cultivating time period when I started to switch from black and white to color within my work. And I have to say, I'm really enjoying it quite a bit. I wanted to make a notation just because I never really make art that I'm trying to sell. It seems like if I make art that I'm trying to sell, it doesn't necessarily sell. But when I make art that I think I want to keep, it doesn't matter to me, it's all about the meaning, that seems to sell. So 12 of these panels were purchased by Delta Airlines for their permanent collection and now are displayed at the International Terminal for Delta in Chicago. So here's a few more of the pieces. So these were some of the reasons why I was putting Trevor off for a little bit. I was invited to have a 3-person exhibition. It was titled In Reciprocity, Human and Nature, was the exhibition title. It was at Governor State University, and it was with Ginny Kruger. I hope you go down and look at her work. It's absolutely wonderful. And Joanne Ueno. This was 2 of the walls in the exhibition that I had. I shot some close-up details because I feel like standing so far from the work that there's so much more to see when you come up close too. So being the metalsmith that I am and having all these minerals and gems that I've worked with, I have a small collection. So I start adding those into the work on these what look like specimen panels, but were also based on memory and came through the transition of the pandemic in my studio space. I wanted to make sure that I put the pieces on the glass, not behind the glass, kind of like how I wanted to be outside. I took apart all the frame pieces I had and just laid them out and then started laying all these components with on the glass. And I thought, I wonder if I could adhere that somehow and make that stand up against the wall. So of course, the side of me that taught myself a lot of metalsmithing techniques, I ended up using fiber optic glue and wore orange glasses to protect my eyes and had a blue light so that these would be permanently attached to the glass. I don't think I will keep doing that anymore. Like for me, when I feel like I've gone through and I have made a piece and it kind of seems as though it's made its statement, and then I think sometimes it's time to move on. So I also do these environmental community projects that take me outside of the studio because being an artist can sometimes get, a little bit lonely in there all the times, although I do love my peace and quiet, as my husband knows. This I'm very excited about. I had met with the woman who is the director for this wetland conservancy above an abandoned coal mine in Pennsylvania. She's invited me to stay at her house, and again, there was no competition. It was just something I was really interested in investigating. So next year, either in the spring or the fall, we're still finalizing dates. I'll have a residency there. This is her and I walking the fields, and James, he was photographing us while we were exploring, and she was teaching me about like how they filter the water that comes up through the abandoned coal mine. And the reason that I went to it's like just outside of Pittsburgh, is because that's where my family's from. I was aware that there were these issues. My other side of my grandparents were in Washington, Pennsylvania. My dad's parents were from Pittsburgh. So all around that area, there's a lot of coal mining going on, a lot of, things that aren't necessarily great for the environment, but it's an absolutely beautiful part of the country to see. So this is just this little setup that was made. There's, I believe, 4 to 5 ponds that help sift the water and filtrate it before it goes in to the Allegheny River. So this little small town is with a small group of people and a university there. It's not a lot of people. They're helping to clear the water and make sure that the AMD, which theirs isn't so bad, doesn't go into the main water systems through these wading ponds. I'm not sure. I think that's coming up. So I collected some of the pigments. As you saw in that box, I asked, her name's Cindy. I'm like, Cindy, can you send me a couple rocks and sticks? I'd really like to see if I could make different types of pigment to use within my studio so that I could make artwork with this. So again, this process has been going on since about 2019 and finally coming into fruition. And I'm really looking forward to making artwork on this project. So I've been taking it's called a glass, it's like a mulling station that I made, a muller. And if you look at the very bottom of the glass there, it's beautiful. But there's these little tree-like forms that are happening. That's also physics. It's constructal law. I was saying that happens around us in nature all the time. That I didn't realize was aligned with the law that Adrian Busan had developed, of course, with a lot of other people. Everything in science is not just one person. So what I do is I take some of these pigments I make, and I'll add that into the work. So here's another portion. This is, I believe, one of the 5 filtering ponds, and this is where the plants actually help in the filtration of the water coming up from the abandoned coal mine. So it creates like this iron oxide within these pools. I don't understand all of it, but I will learn next year at my residency how that filters. This is the woman who's a director showing me everything and how everything is being filtered. And luckily I have a husband who's a photographer and a film director. Sometimes it works out well. That's when he does have time, but I'm not necessarily always a paying gig. But today I'm very lucky to have him here and also Blake, who works with us. So these are the plants. You can kind of see how big they are. They're rather large. So this is like a part of my practice. I consider it to be art too, even though I'm not making an object. I also like to collaborate with people outside of my field. So I'm just going to share like a couple of the collaborations, even though I've worked with poets, writers, biologists, graphic artists, a lot of different things. So like I mentioned before, Adrian Busan invited me to, he's actually a Romanian-American professor at Duke University. I don't want to go too deep into all of his credentials because we don't have enough time for how many awards that he's won. And I'll just say he got his PhD at MIT. He has made really amazing contributions to modern thermodynamics and developed his constructal law. Also, there is, which will follow after this, is an choreographer, dancer, performance artist, and owner of Christine Isabella Dance Company, which is located in Michigan City, Indiana. Her name's Christina Isabella. And we have worked together too. We might collaborate again in the next year or two. We've just started reconnecting, and I'm kind of excited to work with her again. So this was at the Academia Romania. If anyone has questions, I could share more, but I'll just say that I was graduating from college. I had my final critique 2 days after I gave this talk at Paris College of Art, and I was asked to speak in Bucharest, and I said yes. And I'm like, if I can do that, I can do anything. I don't speak, the language. Thank goodness we could speak in English at both the school and when I gave the talk. This is Adrian Busan. This is, I did exhibit my photograms. You can kind of see them in the back and in the hallway, and gave a talk there, which surprisingly went really well, but I was incredibly nervous. He then again invited me this last fall to give a talk at the Energy Center in Turin, Italy. So this is actually a rehearsal for one of the pieces that I worked on with Christina Isabella. It's actually, I'll let the piece kind of play, where we use my sculpture. There is movement artists, there are sound artists. So this was called Landmass. This was actually done in one of the parks, city parks in Chicago. So, because I feel like we have so much to learn from Native American Indians, I always refer to learning and trying to understand. I feel like they're so much smarter than we are most of the time. This is a beautiful saying. We know the sap which courses through the trees as we know the blood that courses through our veins. We are a part of the earth and it is a part of us. Quote by Chief Seattle.
Drawing You Outside is a community-based drawing project. To launch this program effectively, I become a facilitator rather than a teacher. This is not a class nor an instructional on how to draw a tree. It's a way of seeing, experiencing, and getting back to being a part of nature. I offer a way for participants to be outdoors together, to reconnect through the analog process of drawing. I walk the paths and consider the shapes and forms or fragments from nature with the assembled participants. I begin collecting visuals through recording sound, drawing, writing, or photographing the moments along the trail. I use this research for my future installations. For instance, I have photographed fallen leaves on the trail, and I use these images to silkscreen onto glass with transparent colors to create a sense of overlapping, collected visual memories. When I walk the path, I imagine places that may be special for participants to see. I share these with them one-on-one while we walk, having small conversations while they draw. If they have technical questions about drawing, I share my insight with them on how to draw light using an eraser or how to interpret sound through mark making. One aspect that is particularly gratifying is the feedback loop I experience with others, making charcoal in preparation, drawing on the path, and the connections we make afterwards.
I really enjoy that exchange between all ages, all groups, coming together, just sharing. And I think that's a beautiful part of art, in a sense. To me, that is like a piece of art, but it is like maybe a moment in time. So these are like some of the pictures that you can see. This is on the wooded island behind the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago. And then these are some of the sticks I found on the paths or in the Chicago area. And I made them into charcoal before we actually got there and just gave that to them. I will eventually bring people to come out and make charcoal with me in the future As I said, this is my favorite part, getting everybody together at the end. And luckily I had help hanging all that work. I didn't realize that everybody was going to come to me. I had over 100 drawings from participants in one weekend. I also, while I was in Italy, did a Drawing You Outside project there. This was in Park del Valentino. This was last year at the time when I was talking at the Energy Center. I don't believe that I have the images for that, but they will be up on my website soon. It's very difficult as one person in a studio to keep up with everything. So I am definitely behind on my website, but that is something I hope to move forward. I will read a quote that Adrian had written in his book, which is "Time and beauty, why time flies and beauty dies, flowing time." This was on page 151, and I'm really grateful. He thanked me on the front of the book. I never really thought with making art that I would have a connection with somebody who, was so intelligent. I mean, I grew up in the Midwest, going to public schools, went to Iowa State University, which I'm proud of, but it's amazing what art can do. If you'd like to hear a story about that later, I'll kind of tell you how I think it came about, but he contacted me. I didn't contact him. He sent me an email, and I thought it was kind of like one of those emails that you get like, "Congratulations on your constructed law art," and I thought, okay, what is this? And then I went to the bottom of the email, and I was like, oh my, this is actually from Adrian Busan. I saw him on Through the Wormhole with Morgan Freeman, and that's how I knew about his law. I can't remember what year that was. And so on my website, I just titled a series that I felt that aligned with my artwork, and then credited him on my website. So this outdoor drawing project took me to Oregon Caves National Monument last year. I got 2 artists were chosen for a residency program there. I was one of 2, and this was part of my proposal that I gave to them, or part of the competition. To the right, you'll see what I wrote. And then I also showed what I intended to do, as of course things change. I didn't tell them at Oregon Caves National Monument that I was a bit claustrophobic, but I was so interested in the minerals and the specimens that were in the cave, I thought, I'll just overcome that. I won't tell anybody. So this is inside of the cave. I did go in, I hid it from everybody, and when I finally went in the first time, when I came back out, I let them know. But I was fine. And every morning when I was on that residency, I would hike above the cave. This residency lasted for 2 weeks. So I am done with my talk. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask. Great. So, does anybody have any questions? I'll take a sip of water. Okay. Oh, good. Thank you. Oh, I guess, hold on just one second. We're going to give you a mic.
Okay, cool. As a professional artist, how you've done a lot of residencies, how much time would you say you spend in residencies versus like in your studio? Do you try to do X amount of residencies every so often? Or, I don't know, I'm asking because I'm an artist, I haven't yet had a residency, but they intrigue me a lot, and so I'm just very curious about that.
Well, first off, residencies that are competitive are really difficult to get. So I guess I don't necessarily, I know that I don't want to do a residency every year. I probably would like to do one every 2 years, maybe one every maybe 3 years. Because when I go to that, I know I'm not going to make what I need to make if I'm going to this residency. It'll come out of me in a couple of years or a year after that. I'll make something at the residency, but I want to take that time to be curious about what is around me. But I do put pressure on myself. I mean, I do think, oh, I should have this done, and I never do. So hopefully I will learn at my age finally when I go to the residency at the Wetland Conservancy above the coal mine, that I will just take in a lot of information, not necessarily put the pressure on myself to make all that work within US of the time frame. Because I have to work also, I also have another job in order to keep the large studio that I want, and that I don't want to compromise my artwork at all. So I also support my career through other means, which takes up time. So right now, I couldn't have a residency for a whole month. I wouldn't have enough income to pay out my bills, but I like residencies that are for like 2 weeks. 1 week isn't really quite enough. 3 weeks would be luxurious. I do think when I went to Oregon Caves National Monument, I did have that one for 3 weeks because I thought this is pretty special. They only offered to 2 artists. I wanted to make sure I got that one. Now the ones that were in Paris, you have to understand, they went on a lot longer, like it was 4 months. But I was also attending school, going to the residency, so I could make that part of my curriculum and share that with the professors. And since I came up with the idea to maybe make that happen, they ended up making that part of their curricula for other students to give them opportunities too. Some of them took it, some of them didn't. I was like, why aren't you taking that? Don't you know how hard it is to get a residency? So, I mean, I hope that answers your question. That was a good question.
Hi. So, a lot of your residencies, you've had a chance to be out in nature, and it seems like, based on what you were saying sort of more towards the beginning of your presentation, either you seek out that or end up in those places, but can you give some specific examples on how being in those places and seeing different specifics in nature have influenced your work?
Oh, thank you. That's a really good question. Let me think for a moment. I mean, I chose those residencies, right? I chose to apply for Oregon Caves National Monument. You know, ever since I was younger, younger and like for, first grade, my mother told me, don't go through the woods when you walk to school. She was a single parent and had to leave for a job, so I had to get myself to school. She said, make sure you take the long way around, do not go through those woods. So as soon as she left, I went straight through those woods. So I have always enjoyed being in nature. For me, it's a place of, I don't know if I meditate, I'm not necessarily sure, but it's a place of quietness, a place where everything slows down. I'm in awe of the beauty. It's something that I could never replicate. I like to see how the light comes through the trees. I look at like the spaces between objects or how the light affects objects, and I think that shows in some of the drawings that I've done. And was there another portion to that question that maybe I might have missed a little bit that you had?
Just sort of as to how specific places might have shaped your artwork after you have been to.
Well, I would definitely say I would not have ever made porcelain pieces if I didn't see plant cuttings by the nature or by the, it was the students at Echo de Brew. I've always been interested in nature. My grandfather had a victory garden, and we used to grow a lot of vegetables. I spent time with him in Washington, Pennsylvania, growing up, because my mom was a single parent. My grandparents were a great influence, and so they were quite old, but they had their victory garden that they gave food to the family. So I think part of that is my interest, is that I had always been around that, digging in the dirt. Kind of, needless to say, I live in an apartment, and I actually have my studio on the 4th floor, so I don't have that. So I yearn for it, I believe, and I think that's what takes me there, to those places. So I would say the porcelain pieces were greatly affected by being at school, taking the cuttings from the gardeners, and then dipping those into porcelain slip, and then seeing, it took about 4 months to make those pieces. Many of them were broken. The technician was trying to throw them away. I'm like, don't throw any of those pieces away. I'm like, I would like all of them, because I saw that the stems actually were like tubes, and I thought, oh, you know, being a jewelry artist in the past, that those could be added into something down the road. I wasn't quite sure what, but so I couldn't stop myself. I just kept collecting and making those, because I'd never had the opportunity to do that before. I don't know if I mentioned it, and I think I did. I wasn't really allowed to go to art school when I was younger. I was told that I had to go to a 4-year university because I had to support myself. And so I studied graphic design. So when I had the opportunity at an older age, I went and studied art, which I'm really grateful for. I don't know, looking back, I'm really thankful that I have the ability to make money the way that I do, using my design skills. And I think that all those skills, if you kind of look at those pieces that are in the library, they're like tablets, kind of. They're kind of relate back to a portion of who I am and what I do in or have done in design. And they also relate back to the jewelry that I made by looking close at the work, the components that I use. As you see, I was actually using porcelain a long time ago in the jewelry work too. That's another story. I used to teach at Little Street Art Center and had a studio there for a while, so I'm very familiar with ceramics. Are there any other questions? Oh.
So you've explored so many mediums, which is amazing. Would you say that there's any particular medium that you feel like is able to channel your creative energy the best?
That is a really good question. Channeling my energy. You know, I kind of change what I'm doing a bit, but it always aligns. Like if you see from the beginning and moving forward, I would have to say I'm not sure if I always enjoy drawing, but within all of the work that I do, drawing has been a part of it. What I enjoy the most and where I see myself going forward is through color, whether that be through like their sculptural paintings. I call them paintings that are in the library right now because there's a foreground, a middle ground, and a background, and then there is like this illusion of depth that happens with the light, how it makes shadows onto the back wall. So to me, those are more paintings, but I do know that they are sculptural in their nature. So I kind of foresee myself moving more with color, and I am interested to take that work into oil painting and printmaking. I see the transparency of inks as a possibility, the layering. You can kind of see that with the image that comes through at the entrance, which is actually a photogram that I made at the Hyde Park Art Center that then I digitally photographed, manipulated it in design, then printed it digitally, then drew on the surface, and then painted on the surface. So to me, that's kind of a story of like a lot of the different work that's happening within that space. To me, I can't tell whether that's actually a drawing, a painting, possibly a poster with handmade marks on it. So I hope that answered your question. I think color is where I see my work evolving to. The medium, I want to keep it in my studio. I'm tired of relying on like being at the Hyde Park Art Center and having a photo lab, or being at a ceramic center and having that, because I don't have those tools anymore. What I do have is I can draw, paint, and because I sold all my silver and gold, I can do printmaking, which I love, etching and drawing. So thank you. That was a great question.
A couple of your residencies, 2 or 3 of them have been in Europe, and how is the support for the artistic community in Europe different than this time?
Well, that's a good question. I'd have to say I probably had a little bit more of an in. Like I said, like I don't want to tell everybody all the time, but I'll tell you here. I went back to school at 50. I went back to school for fine art at Paris College of Art. So I had an opportunity to lean on for support with ideas that I had in order to create a residency and ask the professors to come with me with this idea I had. And since I was successful with that, I also thought, well, if I did it once, I can do it again. I mean, I have a bigger story regarding that. That's when I left Iowa State when my junior year, and I drove across the country by myself because I wanted to get an internship. And there were only 2 or 3 students that were offered to meet with people for internships at Iowa State at that point. And I decided, why didn't I get chosen? So I prepared my resume, prepared a portfolio, and I thought, I'm going to go. I have the money. My parents don't want me to go. I've been drawing cartoons for the school newspaper. I've been working at the publications office. I learned the computer, the Mac, you know, you guys won't know, but the very rectangular box Mac to do resumes for other students that were graduating. So without support, but I had to call my mom every place that I stopped along the way because that was before cell phones were available. So I drove into San Francisco after 3 days of traveling, which was the best thing I ever did in my life. I stayed at a hotel there. I called up one of the most famous designers. He also designed, I believe, furniture and objects at the time, Michael Donovan. And I called the firm up and I thought, well, I'm here. What are they going to do? Say no? So I called up, I spoke with the receptionist. I said, could I please speak with Michael Donovan? And she said, does he know who you are? I said, no, he doesn't, but I would love to have an interview or show my work. I have my portfolio with me. I just drove all the way from Iowa State on I-90. She said, can you hold on a second, please? And I said, sure. You know, I was exhausted at this point, but I thought, well, who cares if I get rejected or they say no? No one's going to know. So she said, you know what? He can't meet with you, but the senior art designer can. Can you be here tomorrow at noon? I said, yes. So back in those days, you guys aren't really familiar with that. The portfolios were like huge. And it was my first time in San Francisco. And I carried it up and down the hills till I got to the address. So I was exhausted, but I did have my interview. I did get some names. I was actually on my way down to Los Angeles. I had 3 other interviews at that point that I had researched before I got there, wrote letters out, and actually had made origami thank yous to them before I left, hand wrote into the people who I interviewed with, so that I researched the people in Los Angeles before I got there, wrote them a letter, got an interview. This was all done by mail and telephone, no emails at that point. And I'm losing my train of thought, but what I'd have to say is that I did get the internship. I was there for a year and then came back to school. I don't think my parents ever thought I would finish school, but I did. So what I'd have to say, and I don't know how they are in Europe, you know, regarding that. It is very difficult to get artist residencies, maybe something overseas. You may, if you know someone or you have some friends, I'm still friends with some of the students I went to school with, I offered a residency in my studio last spring to an artist from Mexico that I went to school with. And then this spring, I have a Russian-American artist that's younger that I went to school with. We shared a studio space at school. She'll be coming in the spring. And I'm offering her a residency. I'm not sure that she's had one before, and I know how hard that is. So the exchange that I have there, maybe it will build something, maybe it won't, but in the meantime, I'm building community.
Thank you very much. Let's have another round of applause. We have a reception for Christine in Gallery 1, so please join us in the library to check out the work that you've just seen and continue the conversation. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. It was so nice.